From Glitch HQ on Riverside Avenue in temperate, bikeable Minneapolis, this is Nice Games Club, the show where nice game devs talk gaming and game development.
I'm Martha McGarry, and I make nice games.
I'm Stephen McGregor, and I make nice games.
And I'm Mark LaCroix. I, too, make nice games. On this roundtable episode, our topics are Impostor Syndrome, news and impressions from some of last month's big gaming events, and getting started with VR development. And so, for the very first time, let's start. All right, guys, we're doing it for real.
We are.
We can't pull back now. We're committed.
We end this.
It's Nice Games Club. We're here to talk nice games, game development, and we got some good topics. But before we start, let's do a little bit of maybe an introduction, maybe why we started doing this. Steven?
Yeah, sure. Game development in general, right?
Yeah.
Well, I guess through Glitch, really, I just realized that I really loved game design, and so I wanted to pursue that further.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've been doing that for, I guess, 2.5 years now.
Yeah?
Yeah, and I'm still rocking it.
Martha, what's your origin story?
Well, my dad made board games, and so I was sort of had games around for my whole life, and then I took a boot camp in programming, and I was like, I could make my own video games. so then I found Glitch, and the rest is history.
Nice. For me, I started doing design, video, motion graphics, and eventually I needed to be able to code to do some extra stuff with that. And then the more I worked with that, the more I realized that that was a lot of fun, and it became more of what I wanted to do. And so I haven't quite let go of anything else, but that's my story. And then when I found Glitch and all of you in this community, it just got better and better for me. So we'll talk more about Glitch as we go through this and future episodes. But for now, let's get into the topics. First topic, Stephen.
Yes, our first topic is Impostor Syndrome.
Yeah,
I know.
It seems apt for our first episode.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I mean, who do we think we are?
Right.
Right?
Yeah. So the definition of imposter syndrome, according to Wikipedia anyway, is a high-achieving individual marked by an inability to internalize their accomplishments and a persistent fear of being exposed as a fraud. So in my experience with imposter syndrome, a lot of times I feel like I'm a fraud only because I haven't done a lot of it. And my brother, he makes his own games by himself. He can do all the art and the programming and all the things. I can code a little bit, and I mainly focus on game design. And so for me, seeing my brother do those kinds of things is humbling.
Right.
I mean, I'm very proud of him, and it doesn't make me feel worse. It just makes me feel like I am not as good.
Well, he defines for you what a game developer is.
Yeah,
right? I think that's where I felt it, is when I compare myself to something else, and I don't meet a definition that I see somewhere else, and that's when I feel it, and I can overcome that by kind of just forcing myself to change the definition to what I am.
Yeah,
a little bit of a coping mechanism, but it's true, right?
Yeah. I guess that's part of it. I don't know, and part of it is like I'm just focusing on game design. Really, I do scripting and stuff because I'm an indie game developer, and you kind of have to do that thing or do those things. But if I could, I would prefer to focus on game design, and so I really prefer to call myself a game designer rather than a game developer. And I see what other game designers do, and it's another humbling experience, I suppose. But what I like to what helps me out with that is like the community that I experience here in Minnesota, and with Glitch especially. We're back to Glitch.
We're probably just going to be talking about that. Yeah. We'll go back to it.
Oh yeah, man, Glitch has been amazing. But just being able to be a part of a community that are all kind of going through the same things I'm going through, it makes me feel a lot more like a game developer because other game developers are doing what I'm doing, and so it helps me feel. It helps me feel a little better about myself. Yeah.
How can we turn that little better into a lot better?
Well, it'd be helpful if I released the game for once instead of just working on a bunch of them.
Don't limit. We don't need to do that.
Yeah, no. You don't have to release a game. It doesn't have to be on Steam or anything in order to be a legitimate game developer, folks. But just, I don't know, just working on games really is what is important on being a game developer. And I'm realizing that more and more.
Mm-hmm.
It just takes some time to tell yourself that and actually believe it.
Yeah.
So Martha, what about you?
We talked at the boot camp I went to code is the first time I've heard like specifically of imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like I didn't really experience it while I was there because whenever I wasn't doing well, I just blamed the teachers instead of myself.
Excellent.
It's like, well, if I can't get it, it's your fault. But I felt it a lot when I was applying for jobs in coding and because selling what I know that I do really good work, but like convincing other people that I do really good work is where I find myself like feeling impostery.
I mean, that's difficult to try to convince other people that you've done important or useful work and that you can provide those skills to somebody else.
Yeah. So, but I guess games are a bit easier to sell to people, I find, mostly because they're really easy to get excited about.
That's true. That's true.
Well, I think you're unique out of the three of us is that your day job is in development.
Yes.
And so it's, do you treat that differently?
Like
in your mind, like when you compare yourself, when you stack your talents.
I guess web development, which is my day job, and game development are very different, but the skills are very similar. Like, actually, I treat everything more like game development than like web development. Every day when I come in and I play test the app that I'm working on, and, which is a lot more boring than playtesting a game. But
it's not very exciting playtesting a game either. Just saying.
That's true. But yeah, I always have the Steven voice in my head going, "Have you playtested yet?"
Yeah. That has helped me a lot, actually, now that I think about it. Having playtests and sharing my game every week and having other people see what you've done and say, well, sometimes they say, wow, this looks like an actual game, which is it's nice. Sometimes there's a bunch of game-breaking glitches and things, and that never feels good, but you pick up on them and you can adjust them on the fly, which is good too.
Right, and knowing that there's work to be done and that you're going to be the one doing it, then that's proof that you're a working game developer.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. So what helps you with imposter syndrome? Is the community just like me, or?
Yeah, having people around to validate what you're doing, and having people like endorse your skills, like I don't know, and getting to show off your work and having people go, yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Yeah, we have to remember to do that for each other.
Yeah, for sure. That's important. I think it's important for us to have those avenues to share your game things. And so I appreciate the things that Glitch has brought. IGDA. What does the IGDA stand for? Independent Game Development Association?
International Game Development Association.
I was close.
It was actually formed mostly like as a trade group for like AAA, right? Like our chapter here in the Twin Cities is much more focused on indie devs because that's who lives here.
Yeah.
It's also a non-dues paying chapter, so it's just walking off the street, which really that's the best part of it, frankly.
Yeah.
So it's easy to think of it as the Indie Game Developer Association because that's kind of how we operate with it, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But that's I don't know how spread out IGDA is in other parts of the country, but it's been very helpful for me. And it's kind of hard to bring yourself all the way over to get to that place to do it, but yeah.
Yeah, well, Martha, at the event last night for IGDA, we met with some people who had never been to one of those before. And it was really
awesome.
Cool to like tell them like you guys are in for a treat if you stick around because they'd done some game jams and they'd worked on some stuff together and just seeing their eyes light up, it was like, oh, that was me a year ago.
Awesome. Yeah.
Aw.
Like just getting involved, because I agree with you guys that like that is what that's you you don't have this, the imposter syndrome is about like you not about not knowing your own worth, but about what you feel it compares to the world around you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when you see the world around you, you get to put it in a better context.
Yeah.
And that's apart from the fact that when you are in those communities, you can get better, you learn, you can teach. And the first time you teach somebody something, that's a huge thing, because it puts you have a lot more value in the things you know.
Mm-hmm.
And even if it's not something you think is exclusive to you or anything, you know that there are people you can help, which means that you've made it a little way, And the community is probably the number one way to get that. So that's my recommendation to listeners who have those feelings is find a group of people, find an event. That's what did it for all of us, right?
Yeah. So, Mark, what
Yes.
about your experience?
So it's interesting because you guys talk about getting involved with Glitch and organizations, and then really like that's the start of your stories, right? And for me, it's a little different because I was working on the game I'm working on now. I was working on sort of on and off for almost a year, or maybe a little longer even, before I knew there was even a community around here. And so my sense of imposter syndrome is from me thinking that I'm this video editor making games, So I didn't really feel like I belonged. I felt like I was somebody else in this field. But I knew enough. I felt pretty confident in my abilities as much as they were, but I just didn't know anything about what you needed to do to be a game developer. And so I just told myself, you know what, it's a hobby, it's a thing. Maybe I'll put it on the internet for free. Whatever. I guess I just didn't take it seriously, and that was my way of avoiding imposter syndrome, right? Like the more I took it seriously, the more I felt like, that I wasn't serious,
Mm-hmm.
and then, then I got involved with the community and realized I was completely wrong. That I belonged as much as anybody, and that I had things to share, and I had a lot to learn, and like that process that sort of we were talking about. But yeah, it is. I think back and I'm like, what took me so long to get to where I am now? And I'm still have a long way to go.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like I've gone so far.
Yeah.
You know?
That's good.
Yeah, it's good.
It's kind of interesting. Like if you see what other game developers do, just not even in our community, but out in general on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, there are just a wide variety of kinds of games that are being created.
Yeah, Twitter is a great example because I mean, just like Screenshot Saturday, right, or hashtag indie dev, or game dev, like it's a ton of people who are your peers.
Yeah.
And I mean your peers in the sense that like you just opened Unity for the first time and you've been working for a week and a half. You have peers out there that are in the exact same place as you. And then you have peers who are just like you who've been working for 3 years on their dream project.
Yeah.
And you can find, so it's not just meetups and events and people to shake hands with. It's just the little points of contact you can make online too.
Yeah. This and you make use of those hashtags too. Those are pretty important because then people can see it, and
Yes.
hopefully you get a like or a retweet.
Yeah, well, there's a bunch of Twitter bots that will retweet indie dev stuff, which is purely designed to like make indie devs feel good.
It makes me feel good.
Totally works. Because 2 a.m, I'll take a screenshot and I'll be like, oh, it's not Saturday anymore. Well, I'll just share it anyway. And then I get retweeted by like 4 bots, and I'm like, I know I shouldn't, but I feel good.
Yeah, you see the numbers and you're like, hey.
And it's not that I like believe that there's someone there retweeting it. It's that I feel good that someone thought to build a bot for me.
Yeah.
To feel better.
Yeah.
And then, occasionally we get a real like or retweet because people do look through those things. They look for inspiration. They look just for fun stuff. And people are interested in what you're doing.
Yeah.
You don't believe it until you find someone who is.
Yeah.
And then you realize, oh, right, the little dumb idea I had, forget about selling your game. Just like explaining it as an idea, you'd be shocked at how easy it is to get people to go, oh, hey, that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
And that does a lot for you when you're toiling away alone in the dark.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that definitely helped. The game I'm working on, Fingens, it was the initial build of it. We worked on it for about 3 months and we didn't really show anyone.
Mm-hmm.
Just doing it in our homes. by ourselves, and we shared it at our the state fair here in Minnesota, and it was
Wow.
it was an experience. The game kind of sucked. I'll be honest. It was not very good. It was actually because this is the first game me and my friend Lane and my brother. Well, my brother had already made a game, but this is the first.
I'd be
game.
happy to know you remembered their names.
But me and Lane, this is our first game we actually like coded, and we're doing all the coding, which. But not only that, but like it was supposed to be like a smaller project. It was originally going to be like a mobile game, and it was going to be weirdly competitive, sort of. You were trying to get more points than the other people, and each person would pass or would like pick an augment that would change how the ship played, and then pass to the next person, and then they'd have to play, I think about a minute long level with that augment, and you would just keep doing that until. I think like 3 rounds went through or something like that.
Oh, that's really interesting because like when I first played Fingens, like the peer team co-opiness of it was so appealing to me, and it's interesting to learn that wasn't always how it was.
Yeah, it was a completely different game. It didn't work out that way though. When I think part of it is just it was our first time doing it, and so it didn't feel right. We shared it out to people; it was hard to explain, and we couldn't get people to like. Really get into passing it. And there were a couple of people that kind of got into it, which was nice. But we realized we needed to go in a different direction. And now we have this Vengeance, which I find, especially right now, I'm finding very enjoyable to work on. And so that kind of stuff. I think a lot of times people are very cautious of sharing their stuff because they don't want to be criticized. They don't want to feel bad about the work that they've done. But I always try to encourage people to share their work as soon as possible, even when it's just a paper prototype or you've only worked on it for like a couple hours programming or something. Because sharing that is an experience that other people want to experience, even when you don't, even if you're not sure.
Right. You put it on the fridge.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Like it's interesting. I was at work. I'd just come back from Indiecade, and we'll talk about that later. And I was telling a coworker about my experience and I demoing my game there. And she said, like, aren't you worried about, like people like taking your ideas? And I'm like, it didn't occur to me that was something anyone thought about but to a layperson, right? Like, but I mean, then what I told her is that no, everyone just wants to work on their own ideas. No one wants to, no matter how good your idea is, no one wants to steal it.
Yeah.
So you're exactly right. Like, and whatever risk there is, if there is even any, it's totally outweighed by the fact that like you get so much, not just emotionally, but like in the actual process of building your game.
Yeah.
Your work improves when you show it to people.
Right.
Whether it's a formal play test, whether it's just a screenshot, whatever.
Exactly.
I think one cool thing about what you were saying too is that the game changed a lot from when you first started, like your first idea. And I think that's one thing that stops people from starting a thing is they're like, oh, I don't have the skills yet to make the thing that I'm envisioning. And that just starting off with whatever it is, even if it's not like the best version of it, it's going to change over time. So, don't be afraid.
Don't be afraid.
I mean, it's okay to be afraid, but
that's an excellent point that we haven't really touched on yet, but like, that it's not just the fear of your own talents, but like, can you achieve your dreams, right? It's about scope and about, I mean, as someone who has started big projects I wasn't ready for, like I'm not the best person to tell you to think small, but that's good advice. It's, I used to tell, when I was doing independent film, I used to tell people like, your first film should not be your Pulp Fiction, right? Like you should, but people really, because it holds you back a lot. And because you're not the master yet of your field for the thing you want to make, that can really make you feel small.
Yeah.
Right. But I guess you should start small, right? They should be proud of that, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I do wish that Vengeance wasn't as big of a project as it ended up being. But being able to work on small projects on the side and stuff helps a lot too.
Yeah.
And just having something, going to game jams. Oh my goodness. That's so helpful because everybody is panicked as you are when you're trying to work on a game for 24 hours or 48 hours.
Yeah. Right. Well, I mean, just yesterday at IGDA, we were talking about 2 upcoming game jams, and I think somebody asked, like, do you need to have any experience? And again, it's one of those questions where once you forget people have these questions because and of course we all jump in and say, no. You can walk in and you do not have to know anything. You can just draw things on paper, and that's part of the process. Like, you don't have to have any skills. Like me, you don't have to know Unity going into a game jam. That was fun. But it's sometimes people don't know to ask until they're presented with the opportunity to. So maybe that's another thing is what, people listening, they've heard it from us, and I'm sure they've heard it elsewhere if they're listening to a show like ours. But what can they do to help others? Like, how do you talk to people about building their confidence and letting them know that they belong?
Oh, wow, that's a good question. I guess being welcoming.
Yeah.
I try to be as welcoming as possible.
Comes naturally to you.
I suppose it does.
What about grumps like me?
You helping people in game jams and things.
Mm-hmm.
Now that I think about it, me and you, Martha, we met at a game jam.
We did.
Yeah, and we worked on our game. I guess it's Clawbreaker now. It used to be called Crustacean Combat. I kind of like that name.
Wait, I thought it was Crab Battle.
It's gone through many days. Being open to meeting new people and experiencing new things helps. Like, I don't know, if you have experience working on something and you want to support other people doing that, going to events like that and answering questions that people have, even if you don't have good answers for them, it's something because they feel like they're being heard.
Mm-hmm.
When I went to RGDA for the first time, I met, I think it was Chip Peterson who was there, and he's been in the game development field for a long time, and just being able to talk to him, and I got his business card and stuff. I felt like I was a part of something. I felt like it was helpful, and so I think that just being open to people. Not even if you're a grump.
Good.
Just being open to answering people's questions because they're going to ask a lot of questions. People are curious.
Excellent. Well, and of course, people can get in touch with us now if they have questions because we're putting ourselves out there, and so we are, of course, the ultimate authority on these things. Right, guys?
For sure.
And we've gotten over it completely, right?
No, yep, never feel imposter syndrome ever again.
All right, problem solved. We'll move on to our next topic then. So we'll take a break, and we'll be back to talk about conferences from last month, and I'll tell a couple of fun stories. All right, Stay tuned. And we're back for our second segment. We're going to talk about a little bit of travelogue for me. I went to a bunch of events, conferences, and stuff last month. Oculus Connect, Indiecade, and Adobe Max I just got back from. There's some interesting game-related stuff there I want to talk about. So I'll first talk about Oculus Connect 3. Big announcements. Everyone's waiting for the touch controllers, the hand presence for Oculus. Right. Bring it on par with the Vive, sort of. I think the room scale versus non-room scale. I've been on Reddit. There's VR Reddit is it's getting worse by the day. Is what it is. But its room scale is such an amazing thing that Oculus kind of just missed the boat on. Like, they were sort of far enough in their plans for the Rift, and then Vive kind of came in and said, "Oh no, you can just redo your living room." And then and so they kind of feel a little late to it. But their hand controllers are by far the best thing.
Yeah.
I've played the PlayStation VR and the Vive, and the touch controllers that Oculus is delivering it's the best implementation of this. The most comfortable. They have the most input mechanisms. Everything about it is just better. And it's a little sad because I think that people have their Oculuses set up in their dens, at their desk, and you'll have enough cameras to do room scale, but I feel like that's not really the problem with those. It's more the prescribed usage, right? They say set up a camera here and here. It's like, oh yeah, but I want to play a room scale game. Okay, take 30 minutes and reset up your room. And it's that's what I think is going to happen, and I'm a little worried about that because I think room scale with those controllers will be every Vive game I've played. I'm imagining with those I just think it'll be a little bit better. So we'll see how it goes. But anyway, that's my thinking on that. It's on my mind a lot when I think about those controllers because they're not out yet. They're coming out December 6th. They'll be $199, which makes the Oculus the same price as the Vive now. If you buy it all in. So that's something to consider if you're sort of picking a horse, is which of those. And I think, I guess really, like, as much as I love those controllers, I think there is still, like, you can pick one or the other and you'll be fine. One of the things I learned, which is so fascinating, is that it's called touch. I always thought it was a dumb name for these controllers.
Yeah.
It's called touch because they have touch capacitive sensors all over it.
What?
And that's how they do finger tracking.
Oh.
So the joysticks, when you put your thumb on the joysticks, they're actually capacitive sensors. And so when you take your thumb off of it, your avatar can give a thumbs up.
Oh.
And so, and the grip buttons and all of the face buttons have capacitive sensors. So as a game developer, like, imagine the extra, like, controls you have at your disposal.
Oh, yeah. Can you strap the controllers onto your hand?
You mean so you don't throw them across the room?
No. So, like, I guess, like, in order to get, like, realistic grabbing motion or whatever, you could, like, strap it to your. If I'm wondering if you could strap it to your hand and then just, like,
so
squeeze your.
Interestingly, the controllers are designed in a way that you can open your hand and they will not fall out of your hand. They sort of wrap around your hand a little bit, so you can hold them fairly loosely without dropping them. And so that actually improves immersion really well, because you can kind of, like, you can actually feel like you reach out and grab, like, an apple in like a demo, and it feels very similar to how you would. And in fact, because you are grabbing a physical object, the controller, it feels even more real.
Okay.
And so, like, that is, whereas I think with Vive, there's been a lot of, gluing the Vive controller to stuff. Yeah. Right?
What were there examples? Was it the touch controller, like, as a game?
Yeah, so they had a lot of demos at the show, and one of the ones that I played that used touch controllers was a game called Lone Echo, which they revealed at the keynote and sounded like this great single-player campaign game, takes place in space, a lot of zero-G, really charming. But what they were demoing at the show, I stood in line for this thing for like half an hour, and then what they were demoing, I had no idea this was it. It was an 8-player multiplayer mode, which is basically Ender's Game, if you guys have read that book.
Oh, yeah.
Where it's like zero-G basketball, basically. But the mechanism you use your hands to grab things and push off. So you are fully in 3D space in all directions, and it's really fascinating because you'd think that would kind of make you nauseous. There's the locomotion problem in VR, right?
Yeah.
This doesn't have that exactly, but it makes you dizzy, but not nauseous, which is actually very unique for the VR experiences I've had. And you see kind of your legs flitting around, and that's not really where your legs are.
Right.
So that's why you feel like you're about to fall over, because it's not exactly where you are.
Yeah.
So I think they have to do a little bit of refining there, but it's really fascinating. The problem I had with it was that it totally encourages a full 360 degree, and not just like turning around and turning back. This thing is a 8-player action multiplayer game. And so you don't just turn around, you turn around 3 times.
Oh, no.
Because you're following somebody who's going across the field.
Yeah.
And so I got like tangled up a lot in this game. Yeah. And it's funny because I always tell people with the Vive, I'm like, you know what? You'll be surprised at how little it matters that the cable is there. That you'll be able to step over it, you'll be fine. You have a sixth sense for these things. You'll be great. But this game proved me wrong. And in the end, like, I think it's because my expectations were really high, because the reveal trailer had a great aesthetic, feel like a good story, the game I wanted to play. And then I ended up in this like Ender's Game thing, and maybe because I lost too, like my team lost, but but I was a little disappointed. But that used the touch controllers in a really interesting way, purely for locomotion, which is like totally different from how you'd expect to use them, which is basically shooting things.
Yeah.
Right. That's the expectation. But Lone Echo, I do give it a lot of credit, because it's cool that already people are coming up with different, interesting ways of using these devices. So yeah, it was pretty exciting stuff. I did a bunch of demos, and the touch controllers I'm so excited about, because I really want to use those. I really want to develop with those.
Yeah, those sound really
I've had a bunch of VR ideas, and I've had a Vive for a while, but like I want the joysticks that come on the touch controllers. I want them so bad, and because I really feel like that would, because the ideas I have like really require that. I don't know why I've boxed myself in that way. So I cannot wait for December for those. The other big announcement was about hardware requirements. So they call it asynchronous space warp. So asynchronous time warp is a system called that's otherwise known as reprojection, where if the frame rate on a VR experience, which has to stay really high, right? In order, otherwise you're going to get nauseous, it's going to be stuttery or whatever.
Right.
If the frame rate drops, or the system believes that it will drop a frame, it takes the previous frame and then takes your head tracking and tries to reposition the frame, like just move it along in your view so that it feels consistent, right? So that it doesn't feel like a dropped frame, it's a repeated frame. And that's actually a great technique. PlayStation VR uses this to duplicate their frames from 60 to 120. So PlayStation VR games run at 60 hertz, which isn't actually very good for VR. It's a little under what you'd want. But then PlayStation VR games all reproject to 120 hertz. So the action you're watching is only happening 60 frames a second, but the motion of your head motion happens at 120, right? So it's a really interesting compromise to get it running on lower end software or lower end hardware. Oculus has had this for a while, and asynchronous space warp is something different, where it's an additional step which has translation. So this helps for when you're turning your head, right, really fast. But it doesn't help if you're moving forward or backward, right? Because there's no way because what it does is it takes the image, the frame, and processes the frame.
Right.
And so it doesn't have any 3D information. It doesn't know anything about the game, which means that developers don't need to do anything to implement it. But it also means that you can't, it has no way of knowing what's around the corner, right? If you tilt your head. Asynchronous space warp is basically just a better version of this, where it tries to take the frame information and extrapolate 3D space, and then it gets to your head translation from the headset and tries to create a new 3D frame from that data. It doesn't have to be perfect, but because it only comes every other frame, it just has to be an amalgamation of the previous and the next frame. And so it sounds very voodoo, but it really works. And what that means, the upshot of it, is that you can now run Oculus games on systems at 45 hertz because it duplicates them to 90. And normally that would be, so on PlayStation VR, 60 to 120, that's fine. But that's because it just does a standard rotational adjustment. And so you can get away with that. But at 45 hertz, you can't get away with that. Yeah. But with asynchronous space warp, it's just extra processing on the frame after it's rendered out by the GPU. So you can now run them at 45 hertz, which means the specs for Oculus games are way lower now.
Oh,
you can run them on, I guess what it was, a 950 or a 940. I might be wrong on that. But a lower end machine, which is a really big news for people who want to get in and don't want to spend $1 bazillion.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe I might think about investing in that.
Yeah, like when we are here working at Glitch or working at home, a machine that runs VR, it can't be a laptop. It can't generally be a laptop.
Right.
And so it creates a lot of problems for developers. This is a good step forward for that, which is really, really cool. So other big news, inside-out tracking, standalone device, called the Santa Cruz prototype, where it's basically the headset. It's sort of like, it's like cardboard, which is just the phone on your face or whatever. It's like that, but a little higher end. So it lives in the middle between a mobile device and a tethered PC. And then the tracking is cameras on the inside looking out into the world. So you don't need to set up your cameras. Just a single device you put on your head and ready to go. Take it to the park, do whatever you want. So that's really exciting. They just teased that a little bit. That's really exciting. The question is it going to be based on an ARM processor? Is it going to be a mobile device? Is it just going to be a little PC? How much power can they get in there? What's the battery life going to be? These are all questions that they just were not, hey, here's the thing. Start imagining now. So that was a lot of fun.
Is it like the HoloLens? Does it map your room or?
I think it does. Yeah, the HoloLens works like that, right? And actually, I've been very impressed with the HoloLens ability to track that way. And when people talk about inside-out tracking, they forget that there's a device out there that does it with phone hardware. It's a very low-powered device. But they weren't specific on what kind of data they store, or if it's just all real-time tracking rather than, whereas with HoloLens, it'll store that data for use later, which helps offload some of the processing as you go. But they really gave no information. They showed a little teaser of a guy with a thing on his head with some wires sticking out the back. There's our prototype. And they let some members of the press try it out, but they gave them no information either. So just to, I guess, prove to them it was real and not just a promise.
Rumor, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that was pretty exciting. But yeah, those were the big news. And yeah, some of the games I tried. But the other thing at Oculus Connect I wanted to talk about was John Carmack, who famously programmed Doom and Quake and left id to go to Oculus to work on, of all things, Gear VR. And I think a lot of hardcore gamers were like, why? What? But I guess he has this tradition at Oculus where at the Oculus Connect events, this is the third one, he has this tradition where he just wanders the halls. And then when people start asking him questions, he stops and then a crowd forms. And so he was doing that all weekend, and I didn't really know about this, but I wandered by and I saw him talking to people, and it was really fun to like hear a veteran kind of talk about the new frontier, right? Mm-hmm. And that was really interesting. And I guess he did that the whole event. And then he did a keynote at the very end of the show, and he was limited to 90 minutes, and he didn't get half the things he wanted to talk about, and he had no slides. He just like talked about stuff. And it was really fascinating. And then at the end, they go, "Oh, I see I'm out of time." And he literally didn't even do like a conclusion. He's just in the middle of a thought. And he's like, "I guess I'm out of time. Well, you guys can find me in the hotel lobby." And he just left. And this is, it's a crowd of thousands listening to this keynote. And, half of them probably didn't understand a thing of it. And I understood maybe a third. And I was just like, okay, cool. So which hotel? What? When? Like, what's going on? He's such a casual guy, I guess. Mm-hmm. It's very strange. But I did find him. In the hallways on the way to the hotel lobby. People had stopped him, and only about 14 people found him. And so we all hung out with him for like an hour.
Oh, wow.
It was so much fun.
That's awesome.
That's so cool.
I mean, a lot of it is, meeting your heroes, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of it too is just like real practical like Q&A. Mm-hmm. Like the guy had a lot to say, and he had a lot to say not just on like the sort of, the forecasting, right? Like what's coming up in VR. How mobile VR matters, because he works with Gear VR, which doesn't have translational tracking and is limited to lower resolution devices, and and just to hear him talk about working on these limitations and what he does to solve those things, but then also like imagining what the future holds for everything, for all of these different categories. And then also like letting a little bit out about like the internal politics of the company, which is fun because, what are they going to do? Fire him? Like, he does talk about, sometimes he'll say like, "Oh, I really shouldn't be talking about this, whatever, and actually there was a media handler who wandered by later just to keep him on, like, just to make sure, like check in, like, "You didn't leak anything big, did you, John?" Anyway, it's pretty funny. But he also had things to say about game design, which is really interesting because, of the pair of Johns who made Doom, he's considered the programmer and John Romero was the sort of the artist designer. And but he had quite a lot to say about like, especially about UI. He was really interested in preaching the idea that UI should be like flat in front of you. Like, it shouldn't be, Job Simulator does a great job of, like, having objects you grab and use.
Exit burrito.
The exit burrito. Who doesn't love the exit burrito? But it was interesting. It was a very compelling case he made, which was just, nope. People have been looking at monitors on screens, so just put a screen in front of them in VR for options and things. He was convinced. And he made there's edge cases. I mean, the exit burrito has its place, partly because it's funny, right? It has a purpose in that realm.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of VR designers are like, how do I get my text floating in the air and get my graphics settings menu? And I think he was very dismissive of like those efforts. He's like, we've solved this problem. Like, we know what a menu looks like. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting because here he is on the frontier of this, and he had this, but he was very specific about like people sort of abusing the novelty of it. And it was really interesting to hear about.
Cool. Yeah.
And it was great. And like, I played Quake was a huge part of my childhood. And then I moved away from first-person shooter games and from PC games for a long time, and so I almost had to remind myself, like, oh yes, this guy did create a big part of like what got me into this field, what got me interested in this topic, and here he is, like, giving me advice. Mm-hmm. It was a rare treat.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Whew. And then I came home for 2 days, and then I went off to IndieCade. And so IndieCade was it's my second year at IndieCade, and I was showing off my game there. Metro Nexus is my game, and I was showing it off at an event called. Oh, Martha, do you want to?
Which is why we call him Metro Nexus Mark.
Yes, thank you, Martha. So I was showing it off at an event called Game Tasting, which is, so you submit to the festival and you don't get in. That's how it works. And but they have this pre-conference, which is specifically for devs, called Indie Exchange. And at that, they have a playtesting event called Game Tasting, and it's mostly peers. And frankly, I'm not really sure who they expect to show up to it, but that was literally my very first playtest of Metro Nexus was last year's Game Tasting. because I didn't know what I was doing, and so I just went to this event to do my first playtest in
Oh,
California.
wow.
That's intense.
And so I'm at the hotel coding the last, a couple of features which didn't exist in the game before. This was when you guys know a little bit about my game, but it started out as this single player kind of puzzle platformer in a way, and then it turned into this multiplayer battle game, and it did that on its way to Indiecade last year. As I was taking it to show off, I submitted it as the single player game, and then in the meantime changed it and showed anyway. And so it has a special place in my heart. So I wanted to go again this year. And even though I don't know how much I would have gotten again out of showing it off here, because I've been doing so many playtests here at Glitch and other events that have been so valuable. In the same way. So I didn't need to travel to California for this. But it was, a little bit of place in my heart. So I went, and that was a blast. And I got to try other people's things. I got to meet some people and do this sort of networking stuff. So that was cool because I'm not great at that stuff. We should really talk about that in a future topic.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's the thing. None of us are great at this. It's just nobody is great at networking. So that's the first thing I learned. But that was a lot of fun. And then the festival started, and the interesting about that was the types of games they have at Indiecade. And as someone who submitted, I think they were fair, right? But you want to see your work, and when I think about the work I want to do is I want to make games that have meaning, that tell a story, but are also not pretentious. I don't want to make artsy games, not because I feel like I need to sell them, but because I don't put a lot of stock in art for its own sake necessarily. Art should say something, but if it's a game, it should be a game, I suppose. I don't know. Maybe luckily we don't have enough listeners for me to get hate mail yet, but that's something that will engender some arguments. Please argue with me because it's an interesting topic. But that also means that at least the way I would have it is a festival would be about showing to publishers, kind of like how a film festival works necessarily, which is, here's our art, please buy it. Right? It's a little bit of a conflict, but Indiecade has that same kind of pull of what do we show here? And so they had a lot of stuff that was totally unmarketable and so very installation based. And a lot of it was really novel. And some of it was this is just an interesting idea, but the execution was so basic, but the idea was so good. So it must be very tough to be on those juries to decide. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I tend to be constrained a little bit more by the holistic every step. Here's an idea, how I'm going to execute it, what form is it going to take? And that, before I finished thinking the idea, I've kind of stepped through it a little bit. I think that is limiting in a sense to me sometimes. But it's interesting to see some of the games showcased here. It's this is great for the 30 people who will ever see it.
Yeah.
And that kind of makes it difficult. What's the role of art in society, I guess, is maybe a bigger topic than we're prepared for. And I realize I've sort of spun into this without really describing any of these games. And the reason is because I didn't really play a lot of them. That I kind of sampled them a little bit. There are sessions, and I went to a summit, and there was a lot of stuff there. So I kind of feel like I missed out on so much, and so I had to kind of pick and choose. I don't know. What do you guys think about what it takes to know a game like that? If something's presented to you, how long do you think it takes? What do you need? What kind of environment do you need to be in? When you show off your work and people come by, do you think they get the whole experience?
That's a good question.
That is why I asked it.
I mean, with Clawbreaker, which is the game that me and Stephen have both worked on, it's a crab fighting game, and the rounds last about 30 seconds each. So it's
so you've not been burdened with that problem.
Yeah, it's an easy game to demo because literally you're this will take 30 seconds of your time. Please play this.
Well, you've also demoed Chimera Genesis, and that game is a lot longer.
That's true. Yeah, that's interesting.
That game has loadout and role-playing elements and narrative elements that kind of take some time to sink in. It has a different challenge.
I think it would be hard to demo a narrative game. I'm wondering how there's another local game, Verdant Skies, which just got greenlit.
Yay!
But their playtests are very different than I think a lot of people because it's a farming game.
Yeah.
And so and it's single player, and so you just people sit there for half an hour playing it and get really engrossed in it. And so they only get one person a playtest or one or two people a playtest.
Yeah, I've seen them do. They've done a couple here at Glitch. They have headphones, so you can just tune everything else out, and you just demo and you just play the game for however long.
Yeah, and a couple of the games I played at Indiecade was the same way. You'd sit down and put headphones on, and it starts to think, well, is the festival environment the right place for this? But would I have downloaded a demo if offered?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think
A lot of big questions around this.
yeah, there's I mean, and every game
Its
is
own
different.
topic.
Every game is different. It's hard to know how you want to present your game specifically. I've wrapped, or we've had issues. Well, not issues per se with Vengeance, but the campaign. It's kind of difficult. We wanna portray like the sense of progression that you're supposed to get, but we also want people to play through like the whole demo and not get bored or have to sit there for 30 minutes before they can move on to something else. And so we've struggled with trying to figure out the right level length for a demo. We've gotten it so it's adjustable. We still haven't figured out the right length for it or anything.
Right, and then the level, I mean, what you're talking about is something where are you going, there's the conflict of like gearing your game to be demoed.
Right.
And not to be played by the person who buys it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big challenge. That's the thing I've faced with my game where I feel like the controls in my game, they're not complicated or super difficult, but it does take a round or two of like the first round or two, you're like, I don't know what I'm doing here. Mm-hmm. And then you kind of pick it up. And it's fun to see people like get there, right? Get to the point where like, oh, I get this now. And then they instantly become good at it.
Yeah.
And that's very gratifying for me. But it's like, I also don't blame someone for trying it once and walking away with a bad impression.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I've had to work very hard to like remind myself that like, it's okay. I don't need to change it. And I might be wrong about that, frankly. Right.
No. Well,
I mean, who knows? But like, I'm cognizant of the fact that it's a different environment for what my final product is going to be, compared to what like I'm showing off at even a playtest where people are very generous with their time and their attention. I have to remember that like they didn't pay money for this, so they don't have an investment in the way that a future buyer hopefully will.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. There's a lot of that, and people are going to give you feedback that might not necessarily make sense for your game.
Yes.
Like I've heard a lot of people give feedback on, you can. I realize people who are listening may not have played Vengeance. I hope that changes.
Well, why haven't they?
I know, right?
What is wrong with that?
We have a free demo on my website that we'll get to. But you can collect scrap in that lets you buy things for your ship, and whenever you collect scrap, it distributes it amongst all the players.
Mm-hmm.
Some people have come to me and said, "Why can't we just have it so that when you get scrap, you're the only one who gets it?" We want the game to be cooperative, and so we don't want to encourage people to be competing over the scrap.
Right.
But a lot of people, some people really like the competitive aspect of the game because there is a little bit of competitiveness. Like there's a score count, or not a score count, but like how much damage you dealt. Some people compete over that and things like that. But we really want the core of the game to be cooperative as best as we can. So we try to encourage that, and it goes into the scrap thing.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you'll get feedback like that just isn't useful, and sometimes people just might not like your game. It might not be for them. Like I'm working on a shoot 'em up, and a lot of people just see a ton of bullets on the screen, and they're like, "Nope." So sometimes that's just the case.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, at these more installation style games at Indiecade that I had some trouble with. I mean, actually, a lot of that I did were actually very good, right? They deserved to be there, and they were really fun. But also, I struggled to feel like what were they getting out of it, other than the sort of prestige of being there. So, like when you show at a festival, is it about like promoting your work, or is it about providing something for the attendees, right? Because there were a lot of games there which are like soon to be published, right? Check out more information at this website.
Yeah.
Or, we have our demo available, or we're going to be released soon, or we're looking for a publisher. And that's a legitimate reason to show it off. That's why we show off our games, right? To get feedback and to sort of get some attention. And then there are some experiences which are like, this is it. This is where you experience it. And I found, and part of it was just me inside my head thinking like what were the planners thinking about how this is put together? And that sort of like I'd go from experience to experience, and I would have to reset my expectations and my thinking of like how I'm going to experience this. And the developers are all there, right? They're hustling for either their work or to answer questions or to help you play. And I want to make sure that I give them good feedback, or that I have good conversations with them, or I can learn something interesting from them. Yeah. And I have to spend a little time. And again, this is like just me in my head, so it might not be necessary, but I have to a little time thinking like, why are they here? What's the point? And what will be valuable for me to tell them or to ask them? So my Indiecade experience was less like fun running around trying new things, and more like these like deep questions about like what is the role of art in society, and what is my role in this industry. Which is why I'm sort of babbling on about these topics at random, it seems. But it was really interesting, and I do need to tell this story. My Indicate experience was capped off with a keynote from Rand Miller, the creator of Myst, who gave this excellent talk about the sort of past and future of games. And from his perspective, it was really fascinating because, obviously he's a legend in the industry, but at the same time, Cyan, his company, was under the radar for a long time, for the past 10 years. And they've always been a small studio. And it's it's almost like they had their time, right? And then they sort of faded into obscurity. But they recently came back with Abduction, their brand new game. It's getting excellent reviews. It's selling pretty well, and it has a great VR version. I'll find out as soon as I get around to playing it. I have it waiting for me at home, and I'm just like, I don't need some time to play it. But he's in a position where he's having a bit of a career renaissance, and so he was in a great mood, which is nice to see, and told a lot of stories, and so it was really fascinating. But then afterward, he sort of held court and talked to people for a while and answered some questions. And so that was just super fascinating. And I told them my story of what you guys play Uru? You remember Uru? Myst Online?
Oh.
It was basically an MMO with no battle system, right? It was reliant on puzzle experiences, which are just impossible to produce on a regular basis.
Right.
And Cyan had a lot of difficulty creating new levels and new content because they just didn't have the funding for it, and there were lots of problems and bugs, and the engine was very old, and yada yada. But it was kind of Second Life in a way. It was a lot of people just hanging around and chatting and sort of being in character, and it was really interesting. And I don't have a lot of experience with other MMOs, but I was really into that one. And one of the things I did was late at night, like 2 a.m, I'd plug in my guitar into the microphone jack on my computer, and I'd go into a central area in the cavern in the sort of public instance. And I just play music, and I'm not a great guitar player. I'm just kind of noodle. And because the game had atmospheric sound effects, so it had voice chat, but also if you were in a cavern area, it would echo off the walls, right?
Oh, that's cool.
As best as 2005 could do it, right? So there I am playing my guitar in a cavern, and people would just like come together and listen. Oh. And it was just a cool experience for me. And I told him this story, and it was just a great moment in my life that I got to tell another one of sort of gaming legends about what the sort of off-label use I made of his game, and how excited he was to hear that, because he talked about how when they designed Myst, they meant it as a very lonely experience. That was the idea of it. But he found that almost everybody played with friends, and it was totally against the design of the thing, in fact. But he found that was actually like really valuable as a lesson learned about game development. And so I was very happy to tell him this story of a similar kind of thing, and seeing his wizened eyes light up was just a great moment in my life. And I realized later, when I got back from Indiecade, that in the last 2 weeks, I met 2 gaming legends who released 2 completely different groundbreaking games from 1993. And the PC games industry like sort of split in half. Right then and those were the 2 games that did it. Yeah. And it was just fun to meet those 2 guys.
Yeah,
so,
that's awesome.
I know, right? Like, and honestly, I didn't expect to see either of them because they weren't on the calendar. Like, it just it just happenstance.
Yeah, that's cool.
So that was really good. So then I came home. Yeah. Okay. And then the last thing I did this month, I went to Adobe Max, which is Adobe's. They make Photoshop, Illustrator, they make design tools. They're very important in my life because my day job uses all that stuff. And they do called the Creativity Conference, and I go every year. And this year I did a pre-conference session on HTML5 game development. And the interesting thing, the takeaway I came away from it, I think people are asked a lot, like, I want to make my first game. What should I make it in? And HTML5 is a lot. People are told that that's a pretty good option. I'm here to tell you it's not.
Oh,
it's just not. And it's fascinating because I think when I started like noodling with games, I would do, I did Flash games, right? Like that's sort of and Flash grew into something bigger. And I think it has a bad reputation now, but it's still a fairly robust engine if you want to make something in it. You probably shouldn't. But but HTML5 isn't quite that. And but when I was starting out, you could make Flash games, little experiments, and they didn't have to be good. That's kind of how you learn some skills. But if you wanted to make bigger games, it was just out of your reach. You just couldn't get those tools. And so you started with smaller tools to make what you could. But these days, like, there is nothing stopping you from using the same tools that is industry standard, namely Unity and Unreal. Even the new version of CryEngine is available for independent developers. And there's just no excuse not to use those tools. But with HTML is sort of another option. I think people are told, like, if you want to do your first thing, try this. And so it was really interesting to learn how JavaScript works compared to, say, how ActionScript worked in Flash or how C# works in Unity. But I think just the takeaway I got was that, like, I think you can't move past that necessarily, which isn't to say you can't make good HTML games, but you're fighting against something.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the biggest bummer of this episode. I think is that lesson learned, and I think people are I'd like to hear if people disagree and what because there have been good HTML5 projects that they do exist out there. My impression was that it's harder than it should be.
Yeah, to me it seems like you should just use Unity.
Well, isn't Juggernauts in JavaScript? I
think so, yeah. And they built like a custom tiling
game.
engine, and I think there's a lot of work that was done there. And part of that is because Zach was a web developer, right? So use the tools and I think that's always good advice, I'll say.
Yeah.
So like, don't let my my bummer like interfere with that. But I think you have to be as good as they are. I think, right? If that makes any sense.
Yeah.
All right. Enough about that. We'll take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about what, Martha?
VR.
All right. Stay tuned. And we're back. And we're going to talk about what, Martha?
VR.
You have news to share.
I used my first paycheck to buy myself a Vive.
Nice.
Wow.
So that's pretty exciting.
You've taken the dive.
I've taken the dive for the Vive.
Someone quick call their marketing department. So, you've played Vive before a couple of times, right?
Oh, yeah.
So now that you have one of your very own, what's is anything different now that you can just use it whenever?
It's nice because I can just be like, well, I'm going to spend like a bunch of time on this tilt brush drawing and not worry about passing it to the next person because
It's yours.
it is. Well, I do have to compete with my boyfriend because he wants to play the arrow shooting game. So
Boys and their weapons.
I don't know. Every person that I've played with who happens to be a guy loves that arrow shooting game.
From the lab?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that too.
I haven't played that yet.
Oh, you're going to love it.
I haven't tried it yet. I need to try it.
At work, I brought in my Vive to show off to coworkers to try to get some VR development going at work. It didn't go great, but I did demo it to a bunch of people, and my boss did the arrow thing. And, he's an older guy, not like old, but so we weren't sure, right, if he was going to be like into it or understand the gamey thing. So we set up a bunch of like more passive demos for him. But we had that one in our pocket in case he was like into it, and he was into it, and he was good.
Oh, wow.
He was super good. He got like pretty much I'd never seen a score that high. It's pretty incredible.
That's awesome.
And I was like, okay, well, I now know not to assume about people.
So, what kind of games do you have on the Vive? I don't have a Vive, so I don't know.
All I have so far is that it comes with three free ones.
Oh.
So Tilt Brush and
What is Tilt Brush?
Tilt Brush. Oh, it's awesome. It's the made by Google, and it's a 3D painting game. Basically, well, it's not a game. It's just 3D painting.
Oh.
So you have all these different brushes, and then you paint in real space, so you can make 3D drawings.
Oh, wow.
It's so
That is
cool.
pretty cool.
And you can paint with light and paint with like goop looking stuff or I don't know. There's all these different type of brushes, and I'm sure it would be cool to see in the future people develop more brushes for Photoshop.
Mm.
Oh, I hadn't considered that. Like the tilt brush, it was a great demo for me, but because I couldn't, I'm very much a graphic designer in a sense. Like I want to be able to snap to grids and stuff. So I had a tough time with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, as an expandable platform, oh boy, that'd be great.
I want a Photoshop level of tools.
Yeah.
In it. I'm just So cool.
Yeah. What have you made? Do you have any masterpieces you've put together so far? Could we maybe share those?
On the website.
Yeah.
I drawn a bunch of insects. As people will probably learn, I'm very into insects. And what are some of the other ones? I drew a fish. I do a lot of like little animals so far.
So do you have like a more sculpty kind of bread box size things, or did you do big kind of man-sized archways and paint mural-y stuff?
I'm really into sitting on the floor and like drawing it in front of me, so it's very like pickable, upable sized.
Oh, can you like move them and stuff too?
I just found out you can.
Oh,
If you click the controllers, you can scale and rotate and move your drawing. Yeah, it's so cool.
Wow.
And speaking of the UI stuff we were talking about before, they have really cool UI in it where it is just menus, but you can move them wherever. So you could have like your or like settings menu and things you can put up on a wall and like click over to it wherever. Yeah. And then also your brushes are all on this on one of your controllers, and so you flip through them and they just sort of rotate around your hand. Mm-hmm. It's so cool.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
So other than fun time, why did you get a Vive?
Because I want to make Vive games or VR games in general. But I'm sort of a Vive fan person.
Yeah.
How do you approach Vive development or VR development?
So the first game that I was working on was with my brother at a hackathon that we both went to. Unity has a lot of built or like things you can just free packages you can download that automatically set up your headset and set up the controllers, and like have a bunch of built-in functions that you can call that do stuff with them already built in. So that's where we started. And we were making a game where it's like Paperboy VR, where you're delivering newspapers.
Oh, cool.
And during the game jam, we only got as far as having a cylinder that you could throw at a box, and it would disappear when it hit the box.
Solid start.
Yes. But like get the mechanic of like picking something up took a while to figure out how to code and physics and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's so much, like you were saying, that the API is really accessible, but at the same time, some of the things you just assume that you want to do, you do have to build a lot of that yourself.
Yeah.
Right?
And from that, my brother has been developing, but he turned the game into something completely different. So now he's making, somehow it turned into Attack on Titan-esque VR game.
Yeah.
I've seen this thing in action. It's interesting how people react.
There's been a lot of screaming.
Yeah. So describe the game. I think you should describe the game.
Okay. So we should have my brother on as a guest. But anyway, you have the controllers and you can. It's really hard to talk about VR games without like visual. You can see me.
Yeah, listeners are not looking at what I'm looking at with his Martha wildly gesticulating their hands and really describing very well what you're trying to get across. And I should just take 100 pictures.
Well, what you do is you hold the controllers up and then pull them backwards, and you start flying forward when you do that. So it like shows a line with the vector of where you're going to go, and you sort of push yourself off like you're it's Spider-Man like feeling.
And there's video of this. We should share that so people can see it in action.
Yeah.
So look for that in the show notes.
And that was because one of the things that we were talking about earlier is motion in VR and how that's difficult to do without making people sick.
Yeah.
So that was one of the things my brother thought would help is having the motion of pulling yourself, and then you could you have a one-to-one thing that you're doing that your body could be like, oh, I'm doing something.
That's interesting. I guess that is a way of going about it. I don't know if other people have. I guess I'm not very versed in VR as I don't have any. I guess I have my phone.
Well, the game I demoed at Oculus Connect, Lone Echo,
Mhm.
uses a very similar kind of using your hands for locomotion.
That's
and
right.
it had similarly mixed results, I think.
Yeah, like at the playtest, some people were like, "Oh my god, this is the worst. I can't." And like Katie just took it off and was like, "No." But then other people were like, "Oh my gosh, this is so cool. Please keep this in, including the like jarring feeling of falling that is in it."
Mm.
And that was the interesting thing, is that when you fall in the game after you've pulled yourself Spider-Man off of a wall or off the ceiling or whatever, like your legs hurt when you land.
Huh.
Ooh, that reminds me of when we went to demo that one VR.
Yes.
Thing. Okay,
This
so
is a great story.
a little tangent, I suppose. So we were demoing Andrew. He had a demo of some VR game, but you it
It's
tracked
one
your.
he's making.
Yes, he's making it. Yes, sorry. But it tracks your hands, and you could like pick things up.
Yeah, it used a leap motion sensor, which is a
Leap
pretty
motion.
common add-on for some VR stuff, and lets you have full sort of. It models your hands in front of you.
Yes.
Which is really, really interesting.
Yes, yeah. So I mean, you can see that, and you can see your hands and everything, and you can pick up random objects. I think there was a vase or a bust. There was a bust of something, and I picked it up, and I actually felt like I had it. And then later on, I asked him, "How did you get my hands to feel like that when I picked something up?" And he was like, "Oh no, that just happens to people sometimes." And I was like, "What?" Nobody else experienced it when everybody else was demoing it, and I was just shocked. That was like the one immersive experience that I've had with VR. That was like intense.
Yeah, and I mean, you know how these things work, and that illusion was perfect. I mean, it fooled you.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And I think we were talking about that because people made funny a little bit, and then we went and we played Job Simulator at my place, and people were leaning on tables and falling over.
That's right. Yeah,
it's like the same. It was, or someone put their hand in a fridge and was like, "Oh, I feel cold." Like, so you were vindicated.
Yeah. So it wasn't just me.
Yeah, so much of this the presence is in your mind, right? And so the question is like about graphical fidelity. It's like that's not the important part, right? Your brain really will solve the metaphor and make it into something real.
Yeah,
and that's very quickly apparent when you start playing with this stuff.
Yeah, we've been doing that for years already with games.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so yeah, VR it's not as crazy a beast as it seems. Have you, aside from that, have you worked on any other VR games?
I haven't yet, but I have been working on a design for a beekeeping VR experience.
Oh, okay.
This is, fair warning, the best idea I've ever heard.
Oh, thank you. Basically, it would be just beekeeping in VR. So you'd have a beehive, and then like smoker that you could pick up and blow smoke on the bees to calm them down, and then you can open it up and pull out the frames of honey and see the bees going around on them. That's my vision anyway.
Oh, cool.
And it would be cool because then people could experience it without having to actually have bees able to sting them.
Right, which is a thing I don't want in my games.
You might accidentally feel like a virtual sting.
Oh my gosh.
If they
I
come
didn't
in.
even think about that.
Yeah.
Wasn't there an X-Files episode like that where someone like thought they got stung by something and then died from it?
Oh.
I didn't even think about this.
Have them sign a waiver.
Sign a waiver, yeah. There you go. So what tools are you using? What do you from Jump, what does it take to put like even a prototype together?
I've picked Unity to use, and then the plugins that come with that, and then of course hardware.
Right.
Which will be different for whichever VR like that you want to do, because it's a whole range of stuff. The Vive and Oculus are like the high end stuff, but people around here have also been developing for the phone and like things that don't need controllers and things like that. Like your brother Steven's brother Charles.
He'll be happy you remembered his name.
I was working on a game called Chroma, which doesn't need controllers.
No, I guess it just uses an Oculus, and people just look at things, and then it'll.
Yeah, it uses a DK2, right? And so, but it's because of that, it's well adapted to be done as a mobile game, right?
Yeah, they were testing on my phone. I have a Galaxy S6, and they tested it for a while, but the battery doesn't last very long on those. So, and I think it overheated a couple of times. So
yeah, that's a common problem I've heard, is that it basically unlock, especially on the Samsung phones with Gear VR, like it sort of goes into like a hardware unrestricted mode, and like mobile devices are as powerful as they are constantly being throttled. Yeah. Because they don't have fans in them. And so it's highly regulated. Like your phone is almost never operating at peak performance. But in situations like that, it is.
Yeah.
And so you see the consequences.
Yeah. I actually developed a Gear VR game during a game jam. It was called Save Jimmy. You're supposed to protect, you're the guardian angel, and you're supposed to protect Jimmy from all of these. Well, he actually just kind of randomly got himself in a really stupid situation.
That's Jimmy for you.
And he was just trying to get to the school bus. But yeah, that was an interesting experience. I mainly did design for it. So my experience was fairly similar. It was kind of weird because people really just enjoyed blowing stuff up, and so we focused a lot of time on that. So most of the design I did wasn't even used.
Right.
That's how those work.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, we talked a little bit about, we were talking about Oculus Connect and like the different types of games you could do with in VR, and a lot of times it really lends itself to first-person shooting games, right? Or in the case of like Gear or Cardboard, in first-person eye lasering games, which, I mean, fair to them, they're super fun and they're very natural, right?
Yeah.
And it's just targeting, right? That's great. But there's more to be had in this field, and so it's like when I'm thinking about designs I want to do, I find it very difficult to avoid having that idea. Because it's so obvious.
Yeah.
You know, but then I want to check myself, but also I want to be like, am I just like, what am I fighting against? It's fun. It's a game. Why can't it be shooting? It doesn't have to be weapons. It can be something else, you know, but the mechanics of it are fun.
Yeah.
Is that something you guys thought about, like the kinds of experiences you want to do, especially as hand tracking and room scale gets more, I mean, we're not going to have foot tracking for a while. You know, we're not going to be able to, I mean, it's just so natural and fun. Like, why fight it? Right?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I guess.
Yes, let's fight it. You know,
I haven't really thought too much about VR experience or creating a VR experience. Because I don't have access to one. I guess like most of the VR experiences I have played and the ones I am thinking about are really kind of gimmicky, and they'd only be like interesting for a few times. They'd only be like sort of immersive, but not something I would come back to and play over and over and over again. I'm more into action games, and I haven't found a VR game that lends itself well to that I would be interested in playing, that is unique to VR specifically.
Okay.
And so I haven't come up with anything yet either, but I haven't really been thinking about it too much.
Yeah, that's one thing that's really interesting to me, that most of the games that have been coming out are like single time experiences. Like you play through them and they can be done in one sitting. Most of the ones I've played anyway.
Do you think that's a function of the form of it, like the VR lends itself to that, or do you think it's more about that this is still a new field, you know, and sort of how you want to put something together in 4 months? That's all you can do.
I think it's a combination of those things, but I think it really does lend itself to bite-sized things because you get tired. And usually right now, since not a lot of people have access to like the more, just any of the hardware for it. Now with the PS4, like the PlayStation VR.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Google Cardboard and stuff, maybe more people will be getting to have this in their house or at least at a place that's more accessible. But like you'll get to see it at a party, and then you only get one time to play it, so you'll play the thing that only is for the time that you're at the party. I would love to see more games that, speaking of parties, involve the people not in the VR headset.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's an area that hasn't been tapped into as much as it could be.
That's true. Yeah, that's the issue with VR is it's really just a one-person experience right now.
Right. And that's really due to cost.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, there's some technical limitations, obviously, about having two head practically in a room or whatever. But the truth is that's just so expensive that they're not really thinking about solving that problem necessarily. Local multiplayer.
Yeah.
But yeah, asynchronous gameplay. That's I'm fascinated by that in all sort of development styles. There's two examples I can think of that really work for that in VR right now. Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which we've all played and is a blast. And it's not necessarily strictly a VR game, technically. Like, it doesn't have to be.
Right.
But it's really, really effective as a VR game. And that one, if you're not aware, is someone has the headset on and they have to defuse a bomb. And it's just a device with a bunch of knobs, switches, triggers, and it's randomized. And they don't know what to do, and the game doesn't tell them. But the other players sit at a table or on a couch in the room, and they don't see what's going on. So they don't actually see the television. There's no video game experience for them. But they have a printed manual of the bomb defusal guide. So then they'll ask the diffuser, what do you see? How many wires? And they'll tell them, and then they will go through the manual and based on what they hear. So it's a communication game.
Yeah.
And playing with you guys is a blast because you find out who's good at Morse code, which is nobody. But also like what people find interesting about, and then we all sort of take little parts of it, right?
Yeah.
With a big team, you're like, okay, I'm going to handle this one. I'm going to handle this one.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing, like, it should really be done at like corporate retreats.
Actually,
it's super fun to lose too.
Yeah, you all have to communicate and you all have to cooperate well in order
Yes.
for this bomb to get defused. So that actually makes a lot of sense. Maybe they should start working on VR games that are for corporate retreats or something like that to add or to promote cooperation within the team.
Yeah, I mean that's a case. VR for good, right? To actually teach those sorts of things. Because, at GlitchCon, one of the keynote speaker had this great thing that I just love, which is that chess teaches you empathy. Even though it's highly competitive, you learn to get in somebody's head, and that makes you value other people more. And it's such a weird roundabout way of teaching that. But that's the power of games.
Yeah.
And I think the VR games. Teaching cooperation is a much simpler task by that measure. But that's an excellent one. The other one I was thinking of is a PlayStation VR game called Playroom VR, which is like a demo that comes with PlayStation VR. And it's very approachable for people who've never tried VR before. So it's kind of the Wii Sports, but it's highly asynchronous, where you have one person in the headset and they're playing like the Godzilla monster who needs to smash buildings. And then you have everybody else with controllers on the couch watching the TV having to shoot at the Godzilla monster from the attack line, and so and it's all very playful and colorful, based on I think PS4 had a Playroom game at launch that was similarly like a demo sort of thing, and that one I'm afraid no one will ever really play because it's kind of a demo thing and people are like I want to do Batman VR.
Yeah.
If you want to show your parents, I think that's a good one, and it's got that asynchronous gameplay that I do wish there were more in development,
That reminds me of a local game from Global Game Jam last year that was 4 players playing a 2D game, maze game, trying to get from one side to the other. And then the person in VR played the giant above the game.
I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and they just looked like a spotlight, like where their vision was with a spotlight onto this dark maze where the other players were trying to go through, and then they could laser the little players. And it was heavily skewed to the person in VR.
Oh yeah. I remember playing that game. Yeah, it was. Yeah, you were OP when you had that headset on. For sure.
I mean, that's the idea, right?
God mode.
Right.
Yeah, but I guess those kinds of games would be pretty cool. Maybe people could start looking to the Wii U for inspiration. I know that the Wii U, there aren't a lot of games that utilize the gamepad very well.
I will say though that Nintendo Land that is an excellent asynchronous design.
Yes,
and it has a bunch of mini games. So that's a great recommendation for people to check out Wii U games that do that.
Yeah. There's not a lot of them that use it well, but I mean,
they gave up on that quicker than I'd hoped.
Yeah,
but there are good ones. Good ones, for sure.
Yeah. It's worth looking into.
Yeah. So Martha, you're not the only developer locally who is getting in this realm, right? We have some friends in our community who might want to shout out to, right?
It's true. speaking of a game that and developer that making a game that can have audience participation, Beach Ball Valley is being made here.
Be still
which
my
is
heart.
the gold standard of
Yep.
VR experiences.
Right. None of you out there, if you have not played it, you really have not VR'd.
It's true. It's just nothing compares.
Who makes that game again?
It's Paul Eckhart.
Paul
yeah.
Eckhart. Yeah,
Yeah,
it goes
Paul.
by Puzzabug. That's his. So we'll put the link to Beach Ball Valley. It's on Steam in early access. It's cheap. You should buy it.
He's updating it frequently. Too.
Yes, he is. That's the thing. That's what's Paul is a great example for this community of like he's got a lot of energy and he's throwing it out there. Like we were talking about imposter syndrome. Like the key is to get your stuff out there. And like Paul got his hands on a demo or a dev kit and then just gave himself over to it. And we should ask him. We should get him on and ask him.
We definitely need to, yeah.
But like just from afar, you can tell like showing it off, helping others get into it. He's done demos. He's done workshops. He's a great example, and I think that's if you want to be a person to help people get through and help people learn, Paul's a great example of that.
There's also, I just remembered, Lisa.
Entropy
Yes,
game.
she's making a game that you play a magical girl, and it's a third person, which is really interesting.
Yeah, and it's a non-violent game, right? Isn't that was the brief on that one?
Yes.
That's a good example. Yeah, and I mean different types, right? It's the you can make one that's not about shooting.
Anyway, we'll link to it.
Yes.
Yeah.
But she got a grant for that, which is really
Oh, yeah?
cool.
Fantastic.
So I'm really excited to see where that goes.
Yeah.
It seems like it's narrative based too, so that's gonna be cool.
I'm particularly interested in that. Like when as a game developer, generally, I like mechanic heavy arcade style games. I think that's a good scope for an indie developer. But for VR, I'm really attracted to narrative. I almost want to make just a linear game, almost a storytelling thing.
Are you thinking of a game that's kind of like Myst or The Vanishing of Ethan Carter or something?
Yeah, a little bit. Like, something that has game elements where the game mechanics reveal story, but that it's the first time I've ever considered creating cutscenes for a game of mine was when I'm thinking about VR games, which is funny because I kind of long ago decided like, no, I've done independent film and I really like that, but I like film and that's what I like it in. In games, I want something different from.
Right.
But I've sort of changed my tune a little bit for VR. I have no solutions, but I've drawn back to that in a way that I sort of cast off a while ago. And there's some good examples, but there's not a lot yet, right? So it's a nut waiting to be cracked.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's the show, guys. Did we do okay?
I hope so.
Did we managed? We're gonna do another
think
one.
so.
You think?
Feeling imposter syndrome about this episode.
What do you say? Let's do it again sometime.
Yeah, sure.
All right, fantastic. So, listeners, now that you know what you're in for, subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast app and give it a good review if you liked it, especially you, Sarah. It's really important for us as a new podcast to get reviews, get subscribers. So, if you had any sympathy for us, please do. We also want to hear directly from you, so follow us on Twitter and all the other things at Nice Games Club. Let us know how we're doing and ask your questions. And lastly, you can find more about the show and get all the links and notes from this episode. We promise to put them together. It's nicegames.club. So until we start again, remember to play nice and make nice.